相信你还记得，小客车是绿色的40元，大货车是蓝色的50元，而连接车则是橘色的65元。而如果当年你是一名老司机，肯定练就了一手绝技，那就是在时速维持100公里的状况下，还能熟练的用单手从回数本上撕下那一张张的票券。当时也流传着无数关于收费站小姐的奇闻，有的驾驶会为了多看一眼漂亮的收费员，刻意放慢速度，用眼神的交流来达成提神的效果。还有像是深夜的收费站，站在那收票的往往不是人的都市灵异传说。当然，更多人曾经真实遭遇的，则是一些尴尬的经历，像是手中的票被风卷走，零钱掉得满地都是，还有后面整排车等到不耐烦对你狂按喇叭，升起的无助焦虑感。不过，在2013年，台湾的高速公路全面转为电子收费，人工收费站正式走入历史。那些曾经的收费站一一被拆除，收费员也只能被迫进行转职。虽然终究是效率战胜了人情味，手一手的温度转换为不带感情的线上扣款，但我们再也不用摇下车窗吸取废气，也不用焦急地翻遍车上的置物箱还有遮阳板，就为了找到那张通行用的回数票。现在的摩托车讲求的是又快又稳，如果车门没有关紧，相信大家根本不敢靠近车门边。但在以前，火车其实是一种开放式的体验，而其中最令人印象深刻的车种就是蓝皮普快车，又或者叫做平快车。这种全车没有冷气，头顶只有几只绿色旋转电风扇的蓝色列车，由于是客车级别最低的列车，搭乘票价比较便宜，于是成为了当年很多学生共同的通勤回忆。绿皮沙发、车顶吊环、金属置物架是它的经典内装，厚重的窗户可以往上直接推开，乘客能透过窗口享受自然风，并欣赏沿途的风景。而有搭过的人肯定无法忘记，当火车经过山洞的时候，巨大的轰隆声会伴随着柴油的烟味透过窗户灌进车厢，这时就会看见大家着急关窗的狼狈模样。当时这些列车使用的是手动门，我们常常可以看到有一些性急的乘客会在火车进站还没完全停稳时，就会把门直接一把拉开，跳上月台。许多男学生都把跳车的技巧当作考验自己勇气的试验，虽然危险，但当年通过考验幸存下来的人，如今成为很多爸爸和阿公与儿子、孙子吹嘘自己当年到底有多勇的冒险故事。后来，随着铁路的电气化与现代化，这种无法自动关门也没有空调的老火车，想当然的被台湾铁路局所逐渐淘汰。不过，有部分的古董老火车如今被改造成怀旧观光列车，以蓝皮916号的名称传承了当年的铁路故事。乘客们能于芳寮往返台东的路线，随着列车的颠簸，重温那一段消失的过往。如果要定义90年代台湾街头的味道，那绝对是二行程机油燃烧后的白烟味。在这个充满激情的机车战国年代，丰达迪奥、雅马哈 Jog、光阳名流150，在电动机车还没出世的时期，这些名字不仅是交通工具，也同时代表着年轻人在同才之间的地位。二行程引擎那高频尖锐的声浪，在一般人耳里或许听起来像是愤怒的蚊子在集体哀嚎，但在改装族听起来却拥有宛如天籁般的魔力。当时的车主都会随身携带一罐机油，因为二行程机车 A 加 OU，相较于后来的4行程机车，多了一份自己动手加机油的仪式感。而既然聊到二行程时代的机车，那就必须要来聊一下挡泥板女神。当时机车后轮上方的挡泥板流行印着女明星的照片，以现在的角度来看，就是替自己的爱车买 skin 来进行装饰。而当时比较受欢迎的有酒井法子、周慧敏和王祖贤等知名女星。很多人都会在下雨天骑车后用抹布细心擦拭女生们那沾满泥巴的脸。那个时期也同样正值机车的大改装时代，不止改引擎，排气管也同样是必改的项目。但也听过一些悲惨的故事，花了大钱改了全套传动，结果绿灯一亮，还是跑出隔壁阿飞的买菜车。不过二行程的引擎因为燃烧不完全，容易喷白烟，在环保意识抬头之后，政府开始大力取缔并补助汰换。如今我们已经很难在都市里听到二行程机车那种独特的声浪，只能在乡间小镇中偶尔捕捉到那股熟悉的怀旧气息。在国道客运尚未合法化之前，台湾高速公路的大众运输是属于野鸡车的天下。 这些野鸡大客车通常会聚集在交流道下的槟榔摊旁进行揽客，没有站牌，只会随便的在车窗上贴上纸，写着高雄、台中等地名，让大家知道这班车要开往哪里。由于票价便宜，再加上很多地点与乡下地方，野鸡车都会愿意绕进去。于是，在1990年代之前，这些野鸡游览车一度成为了民众往返各地的主流交通工具。由于商机庞大，当年吸引了不少黑势力涉入经营，而这种独特的生态，在以前人称交流道下的江湖。当时的随车小姐或是站务员，手上都会拿着一把金属检票钳，那一次次检票所发出的节奏声响，搭配上娴熟快速的手法，就像是在催促着旅客快点上车。而说到野鸡车的搭乘体验，其实和以前搭乘游览车去进香的感觉差不多。上车后，除了一眼望去的蕾丝边窗帘，还会伴随着超级无敌冷的冷气。车上电视永远都在播司机大哥最爱的诸葛亮歌厅秀和一些画质很差的盗版好莱坞电影。至于野鸡车司机的开车技术，那可以说是人均车神。他们在高速公路上疯狂超车的同时，会一边嚼槟榔，一边拿着无线电，用一些我们听不懂的术语和其他司机交流路况。不过后来政府开放了国道客运的路权，随着同年国光等合法业者强势崛起，安全事故意外频传的野鸡车在政府大力的扫荡之下，这个交流道下的江湖开始逐渐的瓦解，最终变成了大家如今熟悉的标准化，但也稍微有点无聊的转运站模式。亲爱的我们看到黄色的车，很直觉就是计程车，对吧？但可能已经很少人记得，在以前台湾的计程车其实是五颜六色的。当时政府还没有规定计程车的车色，不管是红色、蓝色、白色、绿色，只要车顶上挂个灯壳，就可以是一台计程车。在以前，有些人会依据计程车的颜色来选择是否要进行搭乘，因为他们认为不同颜色的车辆伴随着截然不同的搭乘体验。据说开红车的问讲脾气会比较火爆，而蓝车的司机则通常比较爱聊政治。不过不管是哪个颜色，那个年代的老司机认路的硬实力绝对没话说。在以前没有导航的日子，他们就像是一张张的活地图。就算你讲的是一个超级冷门的小巷子，他们光靠脑袋里的记忆也能顺利的把你载到家门口。还有，现在我们搭计程车早已习惯的跳表收费，在当时并不流行。每次搭车都像是在进行一场博弈，就算车上有跳表机，那也是仅供参考。通常都要跟司机讨价还价一番，讲好价钱才能出发。不过后来为了整顿市容与治安，政府从1991年开始强制规定，计程车要统一烤漆成最显眼的黄色。而这场关于计程车的颜色革命，确实让现在的小黄更安全也更好认。只是随着 Uber 与轿车 App 的出现，计程车是什么颜色，现在好像也没有那么重要了。这大概是许多人初恋的起点，同时也是屁股最痛的回忆。由于未成年还不能骑摩托车，于是脚踏车变成了许多国高中生的主力交通工具。但今天的重点并不是在脚踏车本身，而是在载人。在那个尚未禁止脚踏车双载的年代，这可是小情侣们公认最高级的放闪方式。那紧抓衣角的模样，比起坐在跑车里，两人中间被无情的水杯架给隔开。那一前一后、前胸贴后背的亲密接触，更让人心生羡慕。甚至有些人会刻意营造需要急踩刹车的情境，就为了感受那一瞬间两人之间紧密加压所带来的悸动。不过甜蜜归甜蜜，有尝试过的人都知道，脚踏车后方硬邦邦的铁框，不管是正坐还是侧坐，都极度的不舒服。如果不小心遇到坑洞，那等同于是给屁股上的酷刑。但相信当年为了守护爱情的各位，肯定都咬紧了牙根忍了下来。而脚踏车双载除了代表着爱情的记忆，也同样承载了无数兄弟的情谊。不过兄弟之间当然不适合像恋人一样抱在一块，所以我们在当时会在后轮的轮轴两侧装上金属管，也就是俗称的火箭筒。前面的人负责踩踏板，后面的人则是踩上火箭筒，两手搭着前面朋友的肩膀，那种摇摇晃晃、迎风前行的画面，虽然如今看起来很危险，但却是属于那年的青春热血。后来，火箭筒被视为违规改装，法规也明令禁止脚踏车不得双载。于是，那些在风中双载的浪漫场景，如今已不复存在，只遗留在一代人的回忆里。最后，我们来聊聊关于公车的怀旧记忆。 如果你曾经搭过没有冷气的公车，那相信你的年纪至少也有个30岁以上。早期的公车地板是铁板做的，在那个没有空调加持的年代，只要每逢夏天，公车内部就会热到像是一台烤箱。而且越靠前面的座位，温度会越高，因为当时公车的引擎位置就位于司机的旁边。当时乘客唯一可以自我救赎的方式，就是把窗户拉到最大，让外面的风吹进来，减缓一点热度。在那个还没有悠游卡的旧时代，公车上会有配置车长小姐的职位，她们身穿制服，负责在拥挤的车厢内穿梭检票。而他们每天的日常就是一路上不停的和不同的乘客进行攻防，争论家长眼中那些发育比较好但年纪尚小的小朋友究竟该买半票还是可以免票。当时如果你要下车，公车上可没有下车的按钮可以给你按，而是要拉动公车两侧头顶上的长绳，绳子在拉下去后会牵动车头的铃铛，在铃声响起后，司机就会知道有人想要下车。后来有空调的公车逐渐普及，公车公司曾短暂的依据车上空调的有无收取不同的车费，但最终电子按钮还是完全取代了拉绳，而悠游卡等电子票券也取代了人工检票。曾经是许多人儿时职业梦想的车长小姐，也伴随着旧式的公车走入了历史。以上就是今天拔蜡盘点的内容。这些曾经的交通日常都已成为了过去式，如今取代他们的现代交通工具，的确让我们的生活变得更加的便利。但相比起从前，心里总觉得好像少了一点什么啊，是人情味。最后特别感谢观众温迪来信提供的主题建议，希望你喜欢今天的内容。我们下期见，拜拜。大家好，我是宝拉。消费性电子产品在20世纪末开始快速的成长，各种电子玩具、工具不断的推陈出新，改变人们生活习惯的同时，也带动了影视还有游戏相关产业的蓬勃发展。今天要盘点的就是那些曾经每天玩、每天都在用，现在却几乎看不见的电子产品。话不多说，让我们开始今天的内容。现在很多小孩应该都没有看过收音机长什么样子，甚至不知道收音机可以做什么。不过在以前，那可是每个人家里都一定会有的东西。收音机在20世纪初由美国人所发明，在那个还是书信往来的年代，与广播电台共同成为了人们娱乐和接收信息的来源。而台湾早在日治时期就已经拥有了在地的广播电台与收音机的产品，不过在当时并不普及，主要都是在传递官方的资讯与政策。后来，随着政府对于广播事业的逐年松绑，加上台湾华语乐坛的崛起，于是到了1970年代，即便电视已经问世，但广播电台仍迎来了属于它的黄金时期。受惠于广播的盛行与制造技术的成熟，人人都能负担的价格，让收音机成为了家家户户都拥有的必备家电。于是，在那个台风一来就容易停电的年代，收音机成为了很多人吸收崭新资讯的主要途径。除了新闻、流行音乐类型的常青电台外，像是感情咨询的call in节目、即时路况的播报、药品、保健品的置入广告，还有地方电台的社区见闻等，都是广播听众时常收听的内容。但后来第四台的兴起，电视机里的各种节目逐渐占据了大多数人的休闲时间，于是收音机在家中的存在感越来越低。到如今，很多人的家里甚至早已看不到收音机的身影。不过，在家中消失，并不代表收音机与广播电台已经绝迹。由于广播不需要依赖网络讯号，加上是以纯声音的方式来传递讯息，所以特别适合眼睛被占据的场合，还有通讯不佳的地区来进行收听。像是很多计程车上，还有爬山当进补的人群，收音机依旧是他们每天都会使用的电子产品。不过对更多人来说，收音机已然消失在他们的生活之中。 在网络数位浪潮来临之前，能在线即时播放不同的音乐还有影片，对绝大多数人来说，可以说是一个不可思议的幻想。因为在以前，如果你想要在家听一首歌或是看一场电影，那势必要有录音带、录影带、CD、DVD 等储存装置，还有相对应的播放设备，那才有办法做到。录音带、录影带走入大众市场的黄金时期，大概是在1970年代到1980年代末期。用来播放录音带的录音机，很常和刚刚提到的收音机整合在一起。除了当代歌手的音乐作品外，也很流行传命故事的内容。而用来播放录影带的，则是录放影机。早期大多数的录放影机还没有内建倒带的功能，所以家里一定还会同时拥有一台倒带机。而它最常出现的模样，就是那台会边倒带边发光的红色跑车形象。相比于现在可以随时在影片中切换到自己想看的片段，没经历过的人可能很难理解为什么要倒带。因为录音带、录影带都是磁带的一种，而磁带是一种线性的记录方式。如果要回头看前面的内容，那就必须要把磁带卷到前面的位置，才能再看一次。也就是这样不便利、占体积加上容易损坏的特性，在1990年代光碟片的储存播放技术开始普及后，让磁带很快的失去了它的市场。自从当时每个夜市的盗版大补帖摊贩，还有各家影音出租店，纷纷把录影带的位置换成 CD 还有 DVD，就可以很明显的看出这种流行的变化。于是想当然的，每个人家中的录放影机也陆续的被替换成了 DVD 的播放器，而当年逐渐普及的电脑主机上，也都会安装用来读取光碟片的光碟机。由于录制光碟的技术含量并不高，加上彼时社会对于著作权并不重视，于是台湾光碟片最兴盛的时期，也同样是影视盗版最疯狂的年代。但随着 USB 随身碟还有云端储存空间的崛起，光碟片如同录影带一样，很快的就被大众所遗弃。那些原本每个人家里客厅必备的播放机，也逐渐消失在电视柜中，被收进仓库的深处，或是喂给资源回收厂了。你还记得自己人生中的第一台随身听吗？是这一台、这一台，还是这一台呢？在现在戴着耳机听音乐是很普遍的事情。当我们把时间拉回40年前，如果你冷不防的从包包里掏出耳机和一台随身听，那可是潮到不行，同学同事们都羡慕不已的存在。而说到第一台被发明出来的随身听，可能很多年轻人会以为是 iPod，但其实第一台随身听是由 Sony 在1979年所推出的录音带随身听 Walkman。想想哦，那是个连电子机都还没开始流行的年代，可以边走边听音乐，大概就跟你现在拿着最新一代的 iPhone 一样，走在时代的最前线。虽然要带着卡带有点麻烦，听完 A 面还要手动换成 B 面，才可以听完全部的内容，但在那个还没有智慧型，甚至还没有智障型手机可以玩贪食蛇的年代，大家都很闲，甚至有些人闲到会替录音带进行手动倒带，会找支铅笔或是用自己最细的手指插进录音带的洞里。转呀转呀，就是很多人每天里闲暇时的日常。不过随着录音带的式微，Walkman 开始 walk 不起来了。1990年代初期，CD 型的随身听接棒了录音带随身听的市场。不过 CD 型的随身听存在的时间很短，而且也不算广为流行。主要是一开始超级贵，而正当生产技术趋于成熟，价格开始掉下来的时候，就要面临 MP3 的产品在1990年代末期强势登场。不用携带任何储存装置，时常可以更换音乐，而且更小更轻便的 MP3，瞬间就让每个商场的 CD 随身听完全卖不出去。然后苹果公司在2001年推出了那个可以把1000首歌放进口袋的 MP3 产品 iPod。iPod 可以说是 MP3 的巅峰之作，但却也同时代表了随身听产品最后的辉煌。虽然苹果直到2022年才终止了所有 iPod 的更新，但打从智慧型手机问世起，似乎就早已注定了随身听的结局只会逐渐的消失。说到消失的电子产品，那肯定会说到红白机，或是以前都会直接叫它任天堂。虽然游戏主机直到现在依旧是很多人家中的必备单品，但无法联网的游戏主机的确已经成为了过去式。在1980年代家用游戏主机刚萌芽的时期，任天堂公司所发行的红白机，虽然不是世界第一台的家用游戏主机，比起同时期的游戏机对手，红白机的系统设备也称不上优秀，但实惠的价格加上流畅的操作性，成为了当时所有游戏玩家的第一选择。 红白机会成功的原因，除了性价比高以外，游戏的多元化也是很重要的因素。任天堂除了自己开发的游戏，在当时也移植了很多其他游戏开发商的作品，像是《炸弹超人》《音速小子》洛克人等经典的 IP。但有经历过那年代的人，可能对于红白机的游戏回忆都不太相同。除了冒险岛、超级马里奥兄弟这些每个人几乎都玩过的游戏以外，主要取决于红白机上插着的那块108合一的卡带里放了一些什么样的游戏。当年盗版卡带猖獗，就算是512合一的卡带，里面真正的游戏种类可能也没有超过20种，很多都只是改个游戏名字、调个颜色，就把它当成一款新的游戏。而玩过红白机的人，以前一定有遇过，当把卡带插进主机，打开电源开关，但游戏画面却没有正常显示时，除了会拔起来重插看看外，一定还会有一个额外的动作，那就是朝着卡带的金属片吹气，试图把上面的灰尘吹掉。但后来任天堂曾公开说明，玩家的这个行为会让卡带的金属端氧化，反而很容易造成故障。但对拔拉来说，就是仅供参考，毕竟以前就是吹2下就可以玩了，不要骗我。而红白机后来随着1994年 Sony 推出的 PS 游戏机的崛起而没落。如果在多年后的今天，你曾试图拿出仓库里的红白机想要怀旧一下，那肯定会因为在新电视上找不到相对应的 AV 插孔，而有一种物是人非的惆怅感。在以前，拥有一台属于自己的 Game Boy 曾经是每个小男孩的梦想。虽然游戏掌机直到现在依旧流行，但相比于一台智慧型手机，对于小朋友的吸引力早已大不如前。在1989年时，由任天堂公司所推出的 Game Boy 发售的第一代还只有黑白的画面，但轻易上手的按键设计，加上能随身携带游玩的特性，让 Game Boy 大受欢迎，很快的就成为了每家百货公司的热销商品。不过当时的 Game Boy 说贵不贵，说便宜也不便宜。对很多家长来说，要玩游戏家里有红白机可以玩，根本没必要多花钱买荧幕那么小、很容易造成近视的掌机。但是即便是这样，也挡不住 Game Boy 的销售热潮。Game Boy 不仅拉动了全球3号电池的使用量，也是如今世界级的 IP 宝可梦首款游戏所发布的平台。巴拉当年玩的最多的游戏，回想起来应该是由街机移植的格斗天王。这边要称赞 Game Boy 的品管是真的做得还不错。因为当年为了在格斗天王中敲出招式击败对手，拔拉用双手来回不停的磨蹭按键，ABAB 上下左右，但直到手都磨破皮了，按键们看起来依旧平安无事。和红白机一样，Game Boy 同样需要插入游戏卡带才可以玩。那时候有一种卡带令人印象特别深刻，叫做金手指。把游戏卡带插在金手指，再把金手指插到 Game Boy 上，开机后就可以修改游戏里的数值，有点类似可以摸得到的游戏外挂。而 Game Boy 的系列产品，除了见证了黑白到彩色画面的进程，也独霸了掌机市场将近15年的时间。直到2004年任天堂的 NDS，还有 Sony 的 PSP 同步问世，Game Boy 这才功成身退，完成了世代交替。在以前有一段时间里，当有人跟你说他想养宠物时，你的第一直觉不是想问他是想养狗还是养猫，而是会问他你也想养电子鸡啊？电子鸡在1990年代末期由日本红到台湾，玩法就像在真实世界里养宠物一样，像是喂它吃饭、替它清大便，当它心情不好时陪它一起玩，时常关注它的一举一动，才能避免它突然挂掉，生一场名为重养一次的大病。也如同在照顾一个活生生的宠物，加上携带方便，就像是时刻陪伴在自己身边一样，弥补了许多人家里不能养宠物的遗憾。很多人于是沉迷其中，甚至到疯狂的地步。在当时，很多玩家不仅做任何事都无法集中心力，总是分神在照顾自己的电子鸡，心情也会随着宠物的状态而起伏。甚至有听过因为不小心将电子鸡养到死掉，自己也跟着轻生的传闻。而当时也由于人手一只电子鸡过于风行，发明电子鸡的日本公司万代根本无法负荷市场的需求，于是盗版商趁势兴起。当年台湾大多数的人手上的电子鸡都是盗版的居多。各种电子恐龙、电子兔子，还有一些电子不知道什么的宠物，开始出现在转角的杂货店还有书局里。而电子鸡的风潮后来在一部经典的童年卡通《数码宝贝》的引领下，迎来了一波新的高峰。同样由日本万代合作发行的怪兽对打机，延续接管了电子机的热度。相比于电子机，怪兽对打机增加了摇晃御敌，还有连线对战等互动的功能。在当时绝对是每个班上最热门的玩具，同时也是最常被老师没收的违禁品。 而这股电子机的风潮和所有流行过的事物一样，最终趋于平静。虽然现在仍有推出新的电子机版本，比起当年的画面与游戏性也大大的升级，不过买的人更多是为了怀旧与收藏，实际游玩的人已经寥寥无几。那以前如果小孩吵着要一台 Game Boy，那是真的不能随便答应。但如果小孩要的是一台电子词典，那好像没有什么拒绝的理由。毕竟是为了查英文单字，既然有需求，尽管不便宜，但好像还是必须要买，不能耽误了学习。当年就有很多家长落入了这个陷阱，因为他们并不了解电子词典比起用来查单字，更多的时间是用来玩游戏。电子词典主要流行在1990到2000年代，核心的概念就是把各种外语词典电子化。台湾比较流行的品牌有哈电族、快译通，还有无敌的品牌。相较于现在拿出电子词典来查单字，会让人觉得你好像没有跟上时代。但如果回到那个人人都还在翻字典的教室，拥有一台电子词典的人，无疑就是那个时候最时髦的家伙。当时的电子词典除了会收录各种不同语言的词典，开发商也会随着版本陆续加入更多的实用小工具，像是计算机、触控笔、画画、MP3等功能。有的电子词典还会设计卡槽，让你可以加购不同的 IC 卡来扩充它的功能。而在这众多电子词典的选择中，最受学生们喜爱的就是无敌 CD 系列的电子词典。不过它并不是强调它的翻译最准确或是发音最标准，而是如同一开始所说的，它最好玩。无论是内建的还是额外购买 IC 卡才能玩的游戏，无敌系列的电子词典在当时都遥遥的领先同业。虽然有点搞错它的用途，但电子词典在当时那可是唯一可以在教室里光明正大玩游戏的机会。但随着网络时代的到来，即便后来推出的电子词典同样可以上网，但荧幕大小的限制还有功能的多样性，都远远不及当前的智慧型行动装置。于是电子词典似乎也只能逐步的走入历史，成为时代的眼泪。以上就是今天拔蜡盘点的内容，相信细心的你已经发现，以上电子产品的功能，不论是玩游戏、查字典、看影片，甚至是听广播，你现在手上的那台平板还有智慧型手机，通通都做得到。所以如今它们消失在我们的生活之中，似乎也不那么让人意外。但这些旧物如果还蹲在你的仓库角落，有一天你找到它时，它一定会向你抱怨：不是时间忘了我，是你忘了带走我。希望你喜欢今天的内容，我们下期见，拜拜。大家好，我是法拉。你常去超商买东西吗？超商的东西虽然一直以来都会比超市里的东西卖的便宜，但家里楼下或是旁边走2步就有一间的便利性，却让它无可取代，始终在大家的生活中占有一席之地。今天要来盘点的就是那些曾经的超商日常，现在却已经消失的超商回忆。话不多说，让我们开始今天的内容。在2005年时，正值 Hello Kitty 诞生的30周年，Seven 联名 Hello Kitty 在台湾推出了第一个超商的集点活动。而就是这个集点的活动，不仅引爆了全民收集超商贴纸的风潮，家家户户的冰箱都贴满了 Hello Kitty 磁铁的同时，也掀起了台湾超商之间长达多年的行销集点大战。Seven 这种崭新的行销方式，彻底点燃了民众的收集欲。
Relating to the electrical grid, and those will be the sectors. And aerospace defense will continue to be the strong sectors, and really outperform those other sectors.
We've seen, year to date, all of the GICS sectors on the S&P 500 are up, but real estate has barely budged. I wonder if that changes with interest rates coming down. Consumer staples is the second worst performer, and energy, oddly enough, is the third worst performer, I guess because of oil, right? But we're going to need so much energy to power these colossus data centers. Why doesn't it pay off?
Well, I think really when you look at the data centers and the growth in power that we need in this country and other countries, really is going to come from the gas side. So we think that gas will continue to be in strong demand and really detached from the price of oil. And when you actually look at oil, although there seems to be a glut today, if you look down the road a year or two, it may look like the countries producing oil have really been underinvesting. So we may have, not today, not tomorrow, a year from now, have a big surprise to say, oh, we really need to invest more in oil. But we think the case for gas, especially in the U.S., the shale producers feeding into the electrical grid and the need for more power, it's really the only realistic source, is going to make that sector very strong and really detached from what happens to the price of oil.
How much, Margie, does this really lean into the whole real world economy, the old world economy, being dominant? We've seen that to some degree with the metal space so far this year. Do you expect that to continue next year?
Yes, I think so. And I think the U.S. is going to continue to be one of the strongest economies, particularly because the fundamentals are really on our side. When you look at the emerging markets, a lot of them had a big comeback, but fundamentally their economies don't have what we need to really see the sort of sustainable growth. In the U.S., it looks like we're on track to say 2 or maybe 3% next year, which would really put us near the high end of the range of sustainable growth around the world.
I know that back in the day, Margie, you and I used to talk all the time about high-yield bonds and investment-grade bonds and how fixed income fit into a portfolio. Increasingly, you've talked about how equities have been a better proposition for a risk-on move and, frankly, for returns than bonds. Do you think that that's going to shift come 2026?
No, I think the bond market is a place of very small risk and very moderate returns. So you'll get, particularly in high yield, a little bit extra yield, maybe 2 percentage points, maybe 3 percentage points more than the treasury yield. So say 5.5 to 6 3/4, something like that. But you really can't look for much beyond that. If you look at the high yield market, a lot of the poor quality issues have been siphoned off, gone into the loan market. So the U.S. public high yield market has a default rate only about 2%, so it's actually quite safe on a relative basis. And the defaults have been more on the private credit side, which are more than twice that amount. And we think that'll continue. And as I said, there's no room for capital appreciation because most bonds in the high yield universe are trading above their face value. So we can't have the old-fashioned capital appreciation that we would talk about in years past. It just isn't, the math just isn't there.
Margie, I'm just an equities simpleton, so this is a little bit too much for me to understand. Why do we have credit metrics getting better and better? Torsten Slok put out a note about it today, and defaults falling at the same time as bankruptcies hit the highest level since just after the great financial crisis. How does that work out?
Well, because the public high yield market, number one, they have not gotten the poor quality issues they may have in other years because those have been siphoned off into the private credit market. So you just don't have those very vulnerable names. And secondly, during that period of zero interest rates, many high yield companies took advantage of that to restructure their balance sheet, to pay off their bank lines, to issue new debt at very, very low coupon rates, pre-refund issues that might be callable or coming due in a couple of years. So actually, the high yield bond market as a whole has never had such a strong balance sheet overall. And secondly, the supply is really pretty modest compared to the insatiable demand for higher yielding securities. So we think the high yield market is a little, I would say, an island of tranquility, but it really looks pretty good. The only criticism is you aren't going to get those types of equity-like returns that we've seen in other markets, especially if the Fed is very much on even keel, relative stability. It'd be a different case if the Fed were to slam on the brakes, jack up interest rates, but that doesn't look like that's on the horizon at all. So we think the high yield market, for what it is a modest yield, modest risk, and some investors like that, and that's so. And for that, it's a good sector.
What does this mean for private credit, Margie, as we go into 2026 and I see all these non-bank lenders in Blue Owl, Apollo, KKR, Blackstone underwater for 2025? They haven't performed for equity investors.
Well, and that reflects the fact that many many of transactions that were done were in the poorer quality companies that really don't have the ability to improve their balance sheet, to raise their growth, and it was really just sort of a play on spreads of the cost of money versus what they get. And we think that'll continue. And actually, that's a market that is now larger than the U.S. high yield market. It's more than doubled in the last 5 years. So it's really a case of that's where all the marginal dollars have flowed to, and so that will be where the marginal risk will be. And I think that, as we've seen, when there are bankruptcies or blowups in that market, it really hasn't washed over into the bank sector, hasn't washed over into the high yield market with spreads widening out, because the market has distinguished those companies that are under pressure, got way too much money, from the high yield market, where it's more of a because of the better balance sheets and the credit outlook and moderate use of funds. When you look at high yield bonds, the purpose of why they're borrowing money, more than half, maybe even close to 3/4 of the last few years have been to refinance other debt. So they aren't going crazy with paying themselves big dividends or to make acquisitions that will turn out to be too risky. So it's a very attractive sector looking at the fundamentals, really.
Margie Patel of Allspring Global Investments. Wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for being with us. Have a wonderful new year. Right now, let's get you an update on stories elsewhere this morning. Here is your Bloomberg Brief with Lizzie Burton. Lizzie.
Hi, Lisa. Tatiana Schlossberg, the granddaughter of former President John F. Kennedy, has died at the age of 35. She had disclosed and detailed her battle with acute myeloid leukemia, a cancer of the blood and bone marrow. Schlossberg was an enterprising journalist who wrote for the Metro and science desks of the New York Times before transitioning into freelance writing. Elsewhere, Warner Brothers Discovery is planning to reject a takeover bid from Paramount after the company amended the terms of its offer. Sources telling us here at Bloomberg that Warner Brothers board will meet next week to make a final decision. The board is concerned that Paramount has yet to increase its offer, which was earlier rejected as inferior to one from Netflix. And Michael Burry, the money manager who is, of course, made famous by The Big Short, denying being short Tesla shares, despite calling the company ridiculously overvalued earlier this month. Burry's comments come after Tesla took the unusual step of publishing a series of sales estimates indicating the outlook for its vehicle deliveries may be lower than many investors were expecting. And that should be my brief, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Lizzie. All right, Matt, you're a car expert. So what do you think of the Tesla? Do you kind of get into the electric if they had an electric truck or an electric motorcycle?
I increasingly hear positive reviews about the Cybertruck. I have not driven one myself, and I think they're horrendously ugly. But I applaud the company for taking that kind of brave step to doing something different. And so I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, although I have seen people with Cybertrucks not allowed into passing lanes because people are not very happy with the Cybertruck. I've seen that in a variety of places. Have you ever seen that?
No.
Okay.
No. Well, in general, U.S. drivers don't allow anybody
That's
into the
true.
left lane.
That's true.
They get in the left lane and drive very slowly.
People tend to be a little bit less than polite there. Up next, the morning calls plus Becky Blaine of The Points Guy expecting less turbulence for the airline industry in 2026. That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
when policy in Washington is driving Wall Street, we draw a distinction between the rhetoric and the action, bringing you market-moving guests and original reporting. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute news,
geopolitical news,
economic news,
up-to-the-minute global news,
Whenever,
and
wherever it happens.
in Washington, Buenos Aires, Argentina,
Sintra, Portugal,
Ottawa, Canada,
Bangkok,
Tehran,
Jackson Hole, Wyoming,
Windsor Castle, England.
The Circuit de la Sarthe in Le Mans.
and this
and
is Bloomberg.
From the world of politics to the world of business, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live 2 times a day, every trading day. Balance of Power at 1 and 5 Eastern, only on Bloomberg.
When you think about some of the dynamics that we're seeing in terms of supply, we have immigration that's falling. We have retirements that we think continue to accelerate. At the same time, your demand for labor, while slowing, still hanging in there. So what that means is you're going to have a situation where the need for workers is still there. It's just showing up as replacement demand. So payrolls aren't going to look great by any means, but we are going to expect an environment where the unemployment rate remains low.
That was Michael Reed of RBC speaking earlier as we do wait to get that jobless claims number at 8:30 Eastern in about 12 minutes time. Right now in markets, you are seeing just a touch of softness in the S&P. Futures down by about 0.1%. Euro dollar stuck there around 117.53. 10-year yields now higher, which is sort of interesting given the fact that they were lower earlier in the session. They are selling off 4.13% rounded off. Remember that they started the year at 4.55%. Crude firming up after the worst year going back to the height of the pandemic. Time now for the morning calls. First up, Citizens raising its price target on Alphabet to $385 from $340, while maintaining an outperform rating on the shares. The firm expecting Google to accelerate search revenue in the fourth quarter, down about 0.25% pre-market trading on Alphabet shares. Next up, BTIG raising its price target on TKO Group from $235 to $250, and keeping a buy rating on the shares. The firm seeing additional upside in TKO sports and live entertainment businesses in 2026. Can you say TKO?
TKO. Technical knockout.
I'll try to get it again. It's sort of, punch out, right? Is that what it is?
Technical knockout.
Okay, thank you. Technical knockout. I'll just call it technical knockout company. And finally, Jefferies raising its price target on Vanda Pharmaceuticals to $7.50 from $5, while maintaining its hold rating on the shares. The move coming after the FDA approval of Vanda's new motion sickness drug. Those shares up almost 20% in pre-market trading. Turning now to travel. Winter storms testing the U.S. airlines as holiday travel wraps up a volatile year for the industry. Becky Blaine, senior editor at The Points Guy, joins us now. Becky, it feels like this happens every year. Is this year any worse in reality with storms and cancellations?
No, this year hasn't been any worse than previous years when we look at some of the travel hiccups and headaches that we've experienced across the U.S. You've got those summer thunderstorms you can always count on. You've got winter weather. And what matters, though, is the resiliency of the traveler and if they're willing to get back out there again.
Are there any airlines that do better, that outperform in bad weather historically?
Right now, it looks like Delta has been kind of the leader in on-time performance and reliability, and they have a really good outlook going into 2026 as well. And every year we put out our best airlines report at thepointsguy.com, and so you can always read how those are ranked as well.
So is Delta typically one of the best? I mean, every airline is pretty bad, because they just try and pack, for profitability reasons, obviously, as many people as they can into a tiny little tube, and then, most of the seats aren't lie flat, even if you
joyful today.
Even if you go to Seattle from New York. Are there any though that are better than the rest? Is Delta one of those that outperforms in terms of customer satisfaction regularly?
Delta does, and I think United is up there as well. one of American's big goals for 2026 is to work on its customer service and increase its profitability there with on-time performance as well. And so what we're seeing though with a lot of these carriers across the big three U.S. carriers is they're increasing their premium product offering. There's been a demand for it from the U.S. travel market, especially when you look at those outbound international flights. That's where demand is strongest right now. We've seen inbound travel, drop off this year due to a variety of reasons, including government shutdown, immigration policy. And so that outbound, though, remains strong. And the airlines are really counting on that going into 2026 and increasing that product. When you look at some of I was just looking at airline prices the other day to go to Europe in 2 weeks. And I saw a premium economy seat for $5,300, but you could fly first class for $3,000. And so that gives you just a little bit of an indication of what the U.S. market is demanding. They want that better than economy, maybe not willing to pay first class price, but sometimes you'll find a deal like that because premium economy is in such demand right now.
Matt, when was the last time you went on vacation? I'm just curious. You're just yelling at a cloud this morning.
Well, no, because I'm 6'3", right?
Okay.
And unless I pay for a business or first class seat, it's just an awful experience. I mean, there's no attempt by airlines to make it any better for American-sized people.
Okay.
And
PSA,
that's because they need to please obviously shareholders and make as much money as possible, which is fine. If you're an investor, I get it, but if you're a customer, it's not a great experience.
It's also though about traveling to places where you can do fun things like ski, like be on a beach. And I'm wondering, Becky, from your standpoint, whether you are seeing better incentives, the idea of miles or other points that people can get from airlines, from their credit cards. Are those still carrying as much heft, or are you seeing a real inflation in some of those areas?
We've seen some program devaluations over this last few years, but you have to remain nimble. And one of our best pieces of advice at the Points Guy is to leverage points and miles in a program that you're going to earn and use the most. I'm a big fan myself of transferable rewards, so I might double down on American Express membership rewards or Chase Ultimate Rewards points, put my spending on those cards, and then I take those points and transfer them to the airline. So to Matt's point, if you want to fly in a premium seat, like I've flown long haul overseas to Europe from the West Coast for 50,000 miles in a lie flat seat on Air France. Now those seats run about 60,000 miles one way, but still, those deals are out there. Matt, we're going to sign you up for a daily newsletter.
Those are few and far between. I mean, come on. That's very unrealistic.
You could fly in a lie flat seat from New York to London on Virgin Atlantic, starting at 6,000 points. Well, economy 6,000. You could fly upper class for a little bit more than that. We're talking like maybe 24,000 miles or points there, depending on what program you're transferring from. So you just have to know where to look and how to look and who the transfer partners are from the different credit cards. And usually like a one-to-one transfer direct into the airline might not be the best use of your miles or your points. I mean, I might look at American Airlines, and I'm an elite traveler with American Airlines. I have been for many years. I look at some of their redemptions, and they want 400,000 miles for a seat that I can transfer and book through a different program and maybe pay 60,000.
Becky Blaine of the Points Guy, I look forward to you making Matt a happier guy with the newsletter that he receives, and it comes up with some deals so that you can actually travel without raising your fist.
Dress codes would be great.
Oh,
if an airline wouldn't state, because what's the deal with sweatpants and Crocs?
It's comfortable, and you have to take your shoes off. I guess not anymore, but if you have to take your shoes off, you're going to ban sweatpants. What, you think everybody should dress in a suit?
I think, you've got to dress for the occasion, especially if you're going, for you, right? If you're going to go skiing in St. Moritz or whatever, then you should wear a coat and tie.
A coat and tie? I should wear a ski outfit, or I should wear your jacket. I'll wear your jacket next time I fly to go skiing. Coming up, less of that, the more of this. The latest jobless claims data is set to cross with the last economic indicator of 2025. Claudia Sam of New Century Advisors with us to break down the numbers. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
The Middle East and Africa regions are home to some of the biggest deals and fastest growth in the world. I'm Shimana Versace. Join me on Bloomberg Horizon's Middle East and Africa for the stories, newsmakers, and insights shaping the decisions of traders across this exciting region.
You have high levels of volatility.
There's still room to maneuver.
Reduce the opportunities that allows you to increase significantly your net income.
Watch Horizon's Middle East and Africa every trading day at midnight Eastern Time. Only on Bloomberg.
The countdown is on. Everything you need to get the edge at the end of the market day. Get ahead of tomorrow's trading with The Close. Weekdays on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute geoeconomic news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Bonnie Quinn in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and this is Bloomberg.
Know how the market day started.
Find out how it finishes.
Public markets to private markets.
From the micro to the macro.
Covering retail, entertainment, the business of sports.
The supply chains, trade policy, how it all is impacting the U.S. equity market as we drive to the closing bell at 4 p.m.
A holistic approach to covering financial markets.
If it matters to your life, we're covering it. I'm Katie Greifeld.
And I'm Romain Bostic, and this is The Close.
Every weekday from 3 to 5 Eastern.
Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Right now, about an hour away from the open, and we do see a saggy start to the day, the fourth potential straight day of losses to end 2025. Right now, what you do see, although we are clawing back from some of the earlier declines, down about 0.1% on the S&P. When you take a look at the bond space, 2s, 10s, and 30s, a real question about whether the Fed has the space to cut rates and what this means on the long end. A bit of a sell-off as we wait for the latest jobless claims, which we are just getting now, and they come in below expectation, 199,000 versus the expected 218,000 unemployment claims. They also was a slight revision up, but basically flat on the prior week, 215,000 from the previously stated 214. Continuing claims people have been watching as a sign of how much people who are unemployed can actually get work. It does look like the continuing claims came down to 1.86 million. Down from 1.9 the previous week. So we do see declines, and Matt, this really does speak to the ongoing quiet in the labor market, that things don't seem to be falling off a cliff despite some of the concerns that have been out there.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. You know, you get down below 200,000, and that has only happened a few times in the last 4 years. But we have been stuck in this range with initial jobless claims for, well, since the end of 2021. We have been stuck between 200 and 250,000. Ed Hyman once told me it was the most reliable piece of economic data that comes out on the Bloomberg terminal. But I don't know what it means when it stays the same number every single week, right?
You're not alone, and I think that's the reason why you aren't seeing a massive move, although the two-year yield is popping higher, up 1 basis point on the back of this data. The unemployment claims, definitely something that has remained fairly stagnant, although the continuing claims has caught some people's attention because that had been ticking up, so a good sign that we have seen that come in. Claudia Sahm of New Century Advisory joins us now to give us some insight. Claudia, thank you so much for being with us, and Happy New Year. What do you make of this? Matt's point that we've seen unemployment claims basically at the same place for almost a year.
Right. So, as you said, we're not seeing signs of deterioration in the labor market. Like, the layoffs have not picked up in a way that was the downside risk that the Fed has been very acute to, and we haven't seen that. So we're not seeing the bad news story. Frankly, we still need to see some good news in the labor market. So the claims don't get at the piece that's really been sticky, and that's that the hiring rate has been quite low. So yes, good news on the continuing claims for this week, but they are still quite elevated. And so we need a little bit more of the good news. But, the fact that the layoffs have not shown up despite a lot of layoff announcements, like, we're not seeing them in terms of actual layoffs, and that's good news.
Claudia, do you take anything from the idea that continuing claims came in to some of the lowest levels that we've seen going back about a month? Not significant, and they are elevated, as you've said, but does that indicate that people are actually finding work?
It's possible. These are, while the claims data are very timely, I mean, we get a quick read. We have to be careful around the turn of the year. It's just really tricky with the holidays, and, just reading these data is much harder at the turn of the year than, say, the middle of the year. But it is potentially a good sign. And what we're looking for are signs of more stability in the labor market, signs that the hiring rates start to pick up off their very low levels. So this is encouraging, but this doesn't make the case yet, right? We need to see it in the hiring data.
Claudia, what does the labor market look like with the stop in immigration, no new people coming to the U.S., and the demographics, fewer and fewer people having babies, or people having fewer babies? It would seem to me that if you have the economy growing, and we do, and corporate revenue and profits growing, as we do, that lack of supply in the labor pool would mean more demand. But it doesn't look like that, as you point out.
Right. Well, there are all kinds of timing issues, right? It is quite unusual. We saw, in the third quarter, GDP really, moved up higher, and so did the unemployment rate. Right, in a much less dramatic fashion, but it is moving higher. And so, you have the ingredients for the good news story of the labor market going into 2026. Consumers are still out there spending. You've still got the business investment. Companies will need, as they expand, to draw on their labor force. And we should see, and I think this is the optimism that you can kind of see in the minutes from the Fed's December meeting. There's an outlook there that these pieces should come together, and we should have hiring pick up. It doesn't necessarily need to pick up to levels that we saw, 2-3 years ago when immigration was much stronger. But we are at low levels that we have seen wage growth slow some. We've seen the unemployment rate tick up. That is a sign of the demand for workers is just lagging behind the supply.
Diane Swank pointed out a couple of months ago that cutting rates, the Fed lowering rates, isn't going to help consumers in the lower quintile, because subprime rates don't come down with the front end of the curve. But I wonder if it does help the labor market. We've lost, I think, 70,000 manufacturing jobs this year. We've got a ton of incentives in the one big beautiful bill to, I guess, bring those back, and tariffs are supposed to do that too. If those things don't work, does cutting rates help to bring back manufacturing jobs?
Well, cutting rates is supportive of both households and businesses in expansion. I mean, and particularly, say, smaller businesses that, the interest rates that they borrow with, that's a key, calculus of their decision to expand. And as they expand, they can bring on more workers. So, we shouldn't have the view that the Fed has the magic wand here on the economy and it's going to, on its own, revive the labor market. But the Fed pulling restriction out of the economy, it helps. It moves in the right direction. And again, it's a piece of the puzzle. There's also more fiscal support coming early in the year. And it does appear that uncertainty, just broadly about policy and maybe some of technological change, has weighed on the labor market this year. And as that dissipates, that's also another ingredient to kind of get hiring going again.
Uncertainty has also been pretty strong because we haven't known how much we can trust the data or whether we're going to even get the data. And even in this latest batch of numbers, one terminal user points out that seasonal adjustment, if you strip that out, you actually see initial jobless claims that are higher than the previous week. So what do you make of these types of seasonal adjustments, of these types of calculations that have raised more questions than given answers?
Right. Well, these issues with seasonal adjustment, these are the mainstay of trying to read macroeconomic data, right? Like, as I said, around the turn of the year, claims data are tough. From Thanksgiving into early in the year is just that's just a hard read. And so you do a lot of averaging, kind of look at the basic trend, and the basic trend looks pretty good, right? So don't make too much out of 1 week. But yes, these are our regular issues. Unfortunately, we're also dealing with, the backlog of the government shutdown and data collection having been very disrupted. And even as we're getting data, and the claims data, this does not apply to them, but say like the CPI or the labor market data, the shutdown casts a long shadow. Like, we have distorted data in a way that we don't typically have distortions. We don't typically lose a month of data and then try and pick up the pieces afterwards. So it does make it more complicated, but, thankfully there's a lot of information out there. You just kind of, pull it all in and get a sense of what's going on. And really the tenor of the data in general is pretty good. I mean, solid. There, like I said, we still need labor market to pick up, but the ingredients are there.
When I feel good, I walk down the street and I see all these people going to stores and being together and going to work. And when I want to feel bad, I read the news and I read all these stories about how computers are coming for our jobs and how a lot of places are seeing opportunities to replace human labor with algorithmic programs. I'm just wondering, based on the data that you've been looking at, how much credence is there behind this sort of replacement concept of AI?
Well, I think looking at surveys, industry level data, when we think about the labor market being somewhat slow right now, I don't think that AI really can, you can point to that as a key driver broadly. There are some industries in tech, increasingly in finance, where you see more adoption, and there probably are cost savings happening with employers. I think, it does fit into this piece of the broader uncertainty, right? Like, do you need to hire? Do you need these workers? That's much harder to parse out of the data because there's a lot of different sources of uncertainty right now that businesses have. But in terms of, the adoption really holding back the labor market, I think it's hard to point to a broad story, but it is certainly something to watch. But we should also remember that the new technology also enables new jobs and new uses of technology. So it's not just about saving labor, it's also about making labor more productive. And that can be a real good news story over the long haul.
Claudia, I love when you're on because I learned so much from you and because of your notable achievements in economics, but also because you went to Denison and I spent a year there. My dad went to Denison, my mom went to Denison, I grew up in Granville. What do you think of the value of a college education for the average American these days? Because so many, not just kids, but adults are having trouble meeting repayment requirements well into their 40s, and it doesn't look like recent graduates are getting a huge advantage in the jobs market.
Right. Well, technical skills and training they're always important for getting ahead. They do pay off. I have a very ecumenical view. I had an excellent education at Denison University, a liberal arts college, but that's not for everybody. I mean, my daughter's in engineering school at Illinois. She's, different technical training. And I think, in the trades, and there are lots of ways to gain skills. And we certainly don't want to push every child through a college education, particularly with the cost of it. But it doesn't, I still think, and the data bear this out, like the education and the skills, they do pay off.
Claudia Sahm of New Century Advisors. Wonderful to see you. Happy New Year. Thank you so much. See you in 2026. Matt, to your question about college education, having just gone through that process with my oldest, I will say there is this interesting calculus that I didn't find myself making when I was a kid. Do they have job programs to get kids into jobs during, whether it's the summers and internships or not? That's an increasing focus from pretty much every college we visited. So to your point, definitely this is on their minds as well.
And it's so much fun, right? College. It's
Not
such
if
a
I
blast.
can help it. Not mine. Anyway, Matt Miller, thank you so much for joining over the past hour and 45 minutes.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Love the outfit. I look forward to you in a kilt next year. He's heading over to the radio studio, and he'll be taking you through the next 3 hours on TV and radio, just because he hasn't had enough and he wants to really enjoy his heading into the new year right now. By the way, I really love the jacket.
Thank you.
Are you going to switch it out to different jackets throughout the day like Mr. Rogers?
This is just a New Year's thing.
Okay.
So, but yeah, next year, if we have double-digit gains again, I will be on this program in a kilt.
All right, right now we can hold him to that. Let's get you an update on stories elsewhere this morning. Here is your Bloomberg Brief with Lizzie Burton. Lizzie.
I don't know how I'm going to concentrate with the thought of Matt Miller's legs in my head in a kilt. But moving to the news, we've got Elon Musk's xAI purchasing a third building in Memphis to expand its data center complex. The billionaire wrote on X that it will bring the company's AI computing capacity to almost 2 gigawatts. Musk has publicly discussed the plans to build the world's largest data center for AI training and posted earlier this year that Colossus 2 will eventually have 550,000 chips from NVIDIA. Now, if you're hoping to get a Trump mobile phone, you're going to have to wait a little bit longer. According to the Financial Times, the phone company launched by the president's family business won't be available by the end of this year, as originally planned. The company telling the FT that shipments